More people with us. There's many of you here with us so far. Thank you so much. I'm going to just start with a little housekeeping. The structure of this event will first be introductions, then a program with Dr. Timothy Nelson, and we'll have time to take questions and comments. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to write your concern in the chat box and we'll assist you there. To ask a question or make a comment, feel free to raise your hand to be unmuted or type it in the chat box or Q&A box and we will address them at the appropriate time. Karen, I see your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you. Karen, you can unmute yourself to ask your question if you'd like. Okay, maybe that's a mistake. I'll lower your hand, Karen. Eddie, Dr. Eddie, I can unmute you and then I'm going to get started with the introductions in our program. Dr. Eddie, did you have a question? You can unmute yourself.
Sure. I didn't see my my picture or my video, and so I was wondering if that's standard or I didn't.
Yeah, this is a webinar format, so you won't see any of the attendees. There's almost 300 people registered, so it'd be impossible to have us all in a meeting, but no worries, you're not supposed to see yourself.
Okay, good. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being here. All right, let me start with an introduction to Dr. Timothy Nelson. Dr. Timothy Nelson's multifaceted work concerns racism, ambition, and search for opportunity. These themes were revealed in his 2015 Ph.D. dissertation, The Significance of the Afro-Frontier in American History. Dr. Nelson was born in South Central LA, raised in Compton during the early 1990s in the wake of race and class-based conflict with the LAPD. He earned his PhD from the University of Texas at El Paso. Currently, he is a full-time lecturer at CSU Stanislaus and is working with a university press to release his first book. Please welcome Dr. Timothy Nelson for a presentation on Blackdom, New Mexico.
Thank you for having me. Before I start talking, I like it was mentioned, I've been teaching all day. So to kind of help me out a little bit, I would love to have an acknowledgement of descendants, particularly elder descendants, okay? And so I want to hope that there are a few here. I can't see, I'm kind of just on this end and someone else would figure out if they are here. But if they are here, please acknowledge yourself to the group that is filtering that. The first to be acknowledged is are there any preachers, pastors, or deacons here? Okay, and if there are any, please have them acknowledged. And if there is one that would like to say a word before we start, I don't know about prayer because this is a public library, but if there is a pastor first, is there a pastor like bishop, pastor? I don't know all who are here. There's not, okay.
Well, actually, Joseph Brownrigg, they have their hand raised and
okay, would like to be acknowledged?
Yes.
Joseph, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. You have the floor.
God of us all, open our minds and our hearts. and let us remember and look into the future. Amen.
Man. Now,
Timothy,
that may be a little bit weird in public, but I want you to understand we're going to start off with ministers, military men, and Freemasons.
Timothy,
Yes.
there's a Reverend Dr. Audra L. Walton on here as well.
Okay, please, 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 a word. It's fine if you don't want to be acknowledged, that's fine. I just want to make sure because it's hard to understand how to turn desert land into promised land or Afrotopia and not
No, I'm
recognize.
in Santa Fe. I am from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm living there
Okay.
now. I didn't know how to unmute, and I was going to give a prayer, but the brother gave one, and that was fine with me. But I'm, you know, that was the only thing.
And
I
so,
just-
give us a little bit about what what parish or pastorship or your introduction. Go ahead.
No, that was, I actually hail from Maryland via DC. I've been out here about 8.5, 9 years, but I did have a church in Maryland as an assistant pastor. And I really got moved out here because of the spiritual environment. And as I said, people ask me and I say, God sent me. And because there's so much light and love that are out here, but we simply have to bring that to this land. And just like, you know, we have a lot of lack of water, but that water that is, you know, within us and that nature is within us and that grace and that light is something we have to bring. And so that's what I was going to do, is just open it up in light and in love. And because this is a collective group here and you're going to enlighten us all, and we're just all moving in that consciousness together now. So I was just going to bless all of this and what you bring us and everyone that's on this call. And that's what I was going to leave with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have any descendants been acknowledged or recognized or come in?
Sherry
Yeah.
Rogers.
Okay. Can you give us your name and the Blackdom descendancy that you descend from? Go.
Sherry Rogers, would you like to speak?
It's okay if you don't. We don't want to pressure you. I know this is, you know, maybe a little bit of pressure,
Okay.
but
She just showed up.
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay. Hello. First, congratulations on this. This is just so inspiring. So, to my knowledge, I am a descendant of, I believe, Boyer. And if I'm not mistaken, I know I have some relatives on here. And so I believe they're like my great relatives. And so we're just very excited about this. And so it's just an honor to be here. So I know they're on here, but I don't know if they're familiar with all the technical stuff. So
Right. That's why I'm saying anyone recognized or anyone, but thank you so much.
yes.
Are there any elder descendants here? We'd actually really like to hear from elder descendants, and then I'm going to start. And then here's how it's going to go. I'm going to allow. Usually, I just go through and I give you this narrative. What I'm going to do is, as I'm talking about the narrative, and something comes to mind, if you have your hand up, and you can have a question maybe about a document that I bring up, because I'm going to bring up documents. I'm going to bring up newspaper articles, homestead records, and I want us to kind of go beyond just the paperwork and realize there's an imagination on that paper. And if it brings something to you and you're a descendant, particularly an elder descendant, it would be good to hear what your thoughts are in the middle of the presentation. Just stop me right in the middle, because trust me, I've been talking all day and we'd really like to hear from you. So are there any elder descendants that have been recognized?
Timothy, Patricia Landry's on.
Awesome. Okay, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. This is Patricia Landry Stevens, and I am Dorothy Landry, or Dorothy Heron Landry's daughter. Now, she is the daughter of Ulysses Grant Heron and Blanche Randall Heron. And I believe there's several of my cousins that are on as well. And hello to them, and thank you for joining. And I'm grateful to have you take this responsibility and make sure that we're recognized and that all the information is correct.
Yes, I have gotten some stuff wrong and you have made sure I got it right. So thank you. And I trust me, all the corrections you have given me, I promise will be coming after the stuff that's already here. So
that's fine.
Okay,
thank you, sir.
Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Timothy, there are other people, but why don't you get started?
Okay, all right.
Track of them.
I'm enjoying this part. Okay, I'm gonna get started. If you have a thought, go ahead and step in the middle. I'm going to go off script a bit more today because of this crowd. And I want to emphasize certain things that I usually don't when I'm in very secular spaces. This here is a public space, so I get to be a little bit more in tune with how Blackdomites were because they were God-fearing people. So one of the things that you'll notice is that you hear voices of women or a matriarchal sense here, okay? The old narrative had an issue with it, which was the matriarchal or the woman, female, feminine, the whole narrative was based on a singular understanding of patriarchy. And so it lost, I would say, most of its ontological space, and it just became myth in a lot of ways. So what I've tried to do with my work is bring more humanity to it, okay? So as we begin, I talk about what's called the Black colonization continuum. Now, it's a whole, it's 4 words and I made it up. But it unites the 200 years that America has existed and Blackness has existed under this notion of colonization, right? But there are other moments of colonization for African descendants. And so then I usually fall back into talking about diaspora. I usually skip over it, but pardon me, I'm going to have to go a little bit deeper into this section. Okay, so if you want to understand Afro-Frontierism, I begin with Bishop Richard Allen, Prince Hall, and the Revolutionary War. So, and I'm going to be very basic in this narrative. So, Black folks decide that they are going to be sovereign and separate away from the segregation system and so on, including in church. And so you have Bishop Richard Allen leading a group of people group of parishioners who then created the AME church for the most part. This is a really short history because I got to go on to Blackdom, right? So Bishop Richard Allen, boom, minister. Then you have Prince Hall, who is not, I don't believe so much he is military in the normal sense, but he is of the military sense and he works with military. During the Revolutionary War, he's a Freemason, and then he decides to break away from Freemasonry, and Black Freemasonry is born in the same age as Bishop Richard Allen's AME Church. So you have this synergy between military personnel, ministers, and Freemasons, and it rolls through that 200 years that I'm continuing to talk about. Well, into today. Well, you roll back us now 100 years and you end up in Blackdom. And so when you see Blackdom, what you see is a colonization continuum. And today is proof that it still exists. Because we just talked about that's why we started with a word from ministers, because pretty much if you're going to go to an event in Blackdom, it's going to start off with some kind of prayer or some recognition of God, even if you are a bootlegger gunslinger, and we'll get to that in a minute. So why now is Black cowboy culture at the forefront of popular culture? I will say that it begins here. The consciousness begins here with Prince Hall and Bishop Richard Allen. And you'll see, we're not going to read this. Usually I'll go a little bit more in depth if we read and go into it further. But I want you to notice this is the Ethiopian regiment. And then later on, we're going to talk a little bit about Ethiopianism and the notion of colonization that comes out of the church and out of revolution. The church was revolutionary. Those loyalists went on to colonize in Nova Scotia, Canada, and in Sierra Leone, West Africa. And I don't want to skip over the church. Let me go back here. This church, we can go on forever about the importance of this church. But for this section, we're going to focus on the fact that it is at the center of the connection between Freemasonry as well. So, and those lines are basically showing how that triad of revolutionary power went beyond just the US. It went into Liberia, which is also West Africa, bordering Sierra Leone. And so you end up with this triad in Liberia: ministers, military men, and Freemasons, right? Even as the first president, we can go on about that. I want to go deeper. We're not. We're going to start off with the US-Mexico War. It is at the same time that you have Liberia becoming not just free, but sovereign, declaring independence from the United States. So it becomes a beacon for the consciousness of Black sovereignty. And you hear a lot about that in the exodusters narratives, and we can go on, and I can mention Nell Painter, but you know, she has me blocked on Twitter, so I won't mention her right now. Now, we end up in Blackdom. What does that have to do with Blackdom? Okay, I'm going to give you the narrative in a minute, but what does all that have to do with Blackdom? You said a whole lot of stuff, and as my brother would say, you probably made it up, because see, he thinks I made up Blackdom, but we won't talk about that right now. This right here is the Boyer family, and there are a few descendants here. This is the Boyer family tree that I function off of, with Henry Boyer as patriarch coming in, and I think I have his obituary here that we may be able to get to, we may not. And then Frank Boyer. There are other Boyers, of course, John Boyer, and I can go on. There was a lot of Boyers, by the way. But this is the family tree. This is how does that go there? Well, guess what? Frank Boyer was not simply just a military man. He was also a minister trained at Morehouse, or Atlanta Baptist College when he went. And he was a Buffalo soldier. He was in the military. So he was a minister, military man, and Freemason all in one. He was like a superhero. He was like, what's the one with the rings? He had all three, right? So his intellectual capacity became not what you mostly hear in the standard narrative. It became an intersection for everyone else who came to Blackdom. right? It wasn't that he was simply Moses leading through the wilderness. He was more of Joshua, sending the scouts over, hey, see what's over there. That's when it gets biblical, which Boyer would have because he was also a minister. He would understand the language I'm speaking. And you can see, yeah, we will go on. I could stay there for the rest of the time here, but we're going to go on to the narrative. And please stop me if you need to, because there's a lot here. Okay, so before we go into Blackdom fully, I want to recognize for the first time, and I'm going to recognize again, that Blackdom was on Mescalero Apache Reservation land. That is what makes Black people Black colonizers. They were on indigenous land and called it Promised Land, and it was promised government land confiscated from indigenous peoples. So this is the first acknowledgement of it. And what you see there is a box that is right there. You can see Mexico. And the greenery there, isn't that, you see Rio Doso, into the mountain gods. And, if you haven't been there, I'm not on the tourist board or nothing like that. Nobody pays me. It's beautiful over there. So, I want to visit. Okay. Blackdom was a real place. And I do have to make that fact clear because, yes, my brother thought I made it up. Now, I want to show you how many Black people were here in 1800. 1.2%. Percent, yeah. Negroes, 1910, Negroes in New Mexico, 1890. Just to give you a feel of, I don't know about you, but it might be kind of lonely out there in the darkness, under the stars, or it might be freeing. Some of the Blackdomites were born under the institution of slavery, and now they're out in Chavez County under the stars, and there's only a few of them, relatively speaking, right? Only a few of them, relatively speaking, but is that sovereignty? Is it sovereign to be out there under the stars? On Homestead, dry land, may not have a lot of water. I don't know. It depends on your faith in what you're doing. And they saw themselves through the lens of I call it Afro-Frontierism, but that's a whole nother story. I'm not going to bore you with that one. If you want to read more about what I mean when I say Afrotopia, look at Wilson Moses. He speaks about this triad, but not in the way that I do. I kind of, bounce off of what he's saying. And this is just for the academics here who really would like to know where is all of this coming from. I begin with Afrotopia, Wilson Moses. Okay, here's the Washington Herald, Indiana, Thursday, September 10, 1903. Would someone like to read? Can anyone see this? Would someone like to read?
Negro colonization scheme, Santa Fe, New Mexico, September 10. The Blackdom Town Site Company has been incorporated with a capital stock of $10,000. The purpose is to establish a colony of Negroes from the southern states in Chavez County. The name of the town to be Blackdom.
Now, when I first started this study, the question was, are there going to be any documents? Hear me, there are plenty, there are many. And let me go back for a minute so you'll see. This is Washington, Indiana. This ad also went to the state of Washington. It also went to South Carolina. This went all around. They flooded Indiana, particularly after the Evansville riot, which was a race riot in 1903 again, you're probably going to have to read my dissertation to care about all of that. So, but here's the ad that was sent to people who just were in the midst of a race riot. It's a chance at sovereignty and, you know, refuge for some point. Again, we'll go to Georgetown. We won't read the ad, but I'll show you, because a lot of times I have to prove that Blackdom existed, that Blackdomites were as enterprising as they were. And here you go. Georgetown, South Carolina, September 19th, a few days later, right? But still out. What do you see? See, it's there. It was out there. Santa Fe, New Mexican. See, I brought it back home. You see, I brought it back home. Santa Fe, New Mexican, Wednesday, September 9th. Now, can I get a reader? This is the Articles of Incorporation. Can I get a reader? The following Article of Incorporation have been filed in the office of the Territorial Secretary. That matters, territorial, not state, territorial, 1903, not 1912. We'll talk about that later. The Blackdom Townsite Company with the capital stock of 10,000, which is divided into 50,000 shares of $2 each. The incorporation and directors are Francis M. Boyer, Isaac W. Jones, Daniel G. Keys, Burrell Dickerson, Charles C. Childress, John Boyer, Charles Thompson, James Jackson, Charles Clifton, Albert Hubert, George White, Benjamin Harris, and Joseph Cook. Now, 13 Black founders. Okay, so for the most part, they represented a family that went along with that. So that's why we had to read those Articles of Incorporation for the significance. Now, the objects of the company are to establish and operate the town of Blackdom in Chavez County and to conduct a Negro colony in that section. The terms of the incorporation is 50 years, and the principal place of business will be in the town of Blackdom when it is established. Do you see that comma? When it is established? For the present, the offices will be located where? Roswell, meaning they declared sovereignty and they didn't even wait for the town to be built. So 1903 becomes when you can see Blackdom established, because it was established first with their faith and then their consciousness to put it down on paper and then incorporate it and turn their lives into a business. And this is just, you know, for the those who really enjoy history at its granular level. Okay, this is Isaac Jones, and we're going to come. I just want to stop right. This is where I'm going to stop, but I'm going to read this real quick. Isaac Jones, Blackdom Townsite Company's first vice president, began his homestead in April of 1903. In 1905, Isaac Jones became the first Blackdomite co-founder to complete a homestead. The basic process took 3 to 10 years. In 1909, after minimal participation in the colonization scheme, Blackdom was revived as a way to mitigate the impact of New Mexico's impending statehood and the shift from federal to local power. Blackdom's elite owned land, but owning land wasn't enough to realize their Afrotopic dreams. Okay, so why stop here? This is Isaac Jones's, see, Isaac W. Jones, his testimony and claimant. Now, he's writing, and this is an affidavit that is under the threat of perjury, federal perjury. So the question is your present claim within the limits of an incorporated town or selected site of a city or town, or used in any way for trade and business? What does Isaac Jones say? No, sir. Now, why would the vice president of Blackdom Townsite Company in 1905 put that on his homestead records when he's the vice president? Obviously, that's something to do with business or something. This becomes what I consider the lost years. We can talk about it, but I'll move on. You can ask about it in the question and answer. Located 20 miles south of Roswell, Blackdom was a small enclave of landowning Black people. Blackdomites needed a collective action to deliver on the promise of their intersection. During Blackdom's revival, after 1909, Blackdom included the significant striving of Black women as they began participating in the homestead process more fully. Now, I'm going to stop here. So I want you to see, this is John Boyer, and he was the first Boyer to earn a homestead in the Blackdom experiment. It was before Frank. So I start with John Boyer, and I don't want to skip over him because that's significant. He begins the land, I'm gonna call it a land grab, but yes, he was the first to do so. And that's where it was. You can go over here. 285 is over here. You won't be able to see it, but I've recently been out there. I mean, if you do some work, you can get to it if you want. But yeah, 1907. So you can see Blackdom's on the move. Now, I don't talk about this much, but you'll see how these dots correspond to one another. But I'm going to go here. This is where Frank Boyer finally homesteaded. And you notice his is next to Dexter, and 285 is that dark line here. Okay, so it's far away from John, but it's a year later. But you'll notice this wiggly line over here, that's water. So he was closer by water. And so was his brother-in-law, Daniel Keyes. Both of them started their homesteads on the same day and could receive their patents on the same day in 1908. Okay, and this is that quadrant, but they had the bottom two. And I can show you Daniel Keyes, who was married to okay, so this is where I would love for a descendant to cut me up into pieces. But from what I have heard is that Daniel Keyes was married to Frank Boyer's twin sister, Frances. And his name is Francis too. And if there is a Boyer here who can cut me up and tell me I'm wrong, I'll be fine with that. So, and please let me know because I want to know, but that's all I know. So I'm telling you, this is the two of them side by side right next to the river. Okay, during Blackdom's revival after 1909, include the city events striving of women. Let me pause here. Did any Boyer have anything to say before I go on to the next part? That was the lost years, by the way. That's why I can pause right now. That was what I consider the lost years. It was a little shaky, you know. No, sir, this is not connected to business or anything. Any Boyer would like to tell me if I'm correct or not? I don't mind. Okay, I'll keep it moving. Okay. Blackdom's growth intensified with the Homestead Enlargement Act of 1909. The township increased enough that Blackdomites organized a school and reached out to the territorial government for curriculum. This is the act here. You can see New Mexico underlined it for you. We can go back to that. That's a little bit more, granular than I want to get here. I do want to go to what people often not recognize is that the Blackdom was platted in 1920, okay? And it was platted in 1920. Blackdom oil was officially announced in 1919, December. So you can see that's a 6-month period. Blackdom is platted in May of 1920, and then officially June, right before Juneteenth of 1920, right? You can see that. But that is mostly because of the revival created by the Enlargement Act, which was again about confiscating more of indigenous land. But it was desert, not many people wanted it, so they gave you twice as much, and you had to do a little bit less in order to occupy the land. So this is what you can, this is a Google map, but I also put the Homestead map on top of it, so you can kind of see where Blackdom Town Square is in relation to 285 and the Roswell Correctional Facility as well. And then you can see Dexter over here that I still have in white, just so you can see that's in relation to where Boyer, Frank Boyer and Daniel Keyes, they were basically connected right up in there, right? And then you see the Pecos River there, okay. And this is more for those looking for the establishment of Blackdom. This is the 1910 census. This is Frank and Ella Boyer, Edmonia, the ones from the picture. And then underneath that, you'll see also Keyes, Daniel Keyes and Frances and Boyer, wife, Black, from Georgia, right? Okay, and then here's the larger version. We don't have to get into that. But again, if you want to later, when you ask questions, we can go back to it. And now we're into the revival. Revival included educating the next generation by also projecting an intersectional Blackness from behind the Du Boisian veil of their municipality. Their Blackness was important behind that veil of corporate, a business understanding. For 2 years, Harold Coleman, a newspaper adsman from back east, led the advertising campaign published in the Crisis magazine. Separate and equal, Blackdomized projected intentional Blackness and God's sovereignty. And you can see that in their intellectualism. After a few privileged Black travelers reported back to the migrating ambitious Black masses, Blackdom became a beacon for the illuminated. In revival, Blackdom became a real place and more than a refuge. Blackdomites preferred farmers to city folk for the sake of increased production. Everyone was required to adjust to the steep learning curve of dry farming on desert prairies. And you can see, even though they were dry farming on desert prairies, they still wanted a school. This was a consciousness they wanted to maintain. I won't go into their first Thanksgiving, but you can see I can follow from year to year how they went. Well, how about we get someone to read this part, just so that I can take a break from having to talk. Read just this part, this headline. Negroes Thanksgiving. The Blackdom population has imbibed the spirit of the Valley Times and have organized a boosters club. This club gave a banquet Thanksgiving even. Blackdom is a Negro town. Now it goes on into a toast Well, when you go into Toast, when it's in the newspaper, you can tell that there was a Toastmaster situation. So that's where the Freemasonry steps in. And I'll give you an example. You know, you have in this organization of Blackdomites, people talking, giving lectures. What are they giving lectures on? Business opportunities, homesteading, real estate, pumping and windmills. Now, they're talking about pumping and windmills in 1911, right before, on the eve of the statehood of New Mexico. A decade later, they're talking about pumping oil. And who's at the forefront of it? Clinton Ragsdale. What was his lecture about? Pumping and women. You see the possibilities in livestock. You see, well, Clinton Ragsdale, he's also the possibilities in livestock. We talk about the water and the engineering and so on. Immigration, you can see our schools, James Eubank. This is not a singular narrative of one person. This is a community talking to one another on the eve of New Mexico statehood. And this is sent out to, this is in Oklahoma. I just want you to see that Blackdom is out there. This is in Guthrie, Oklahoma, okay? Talking about Blackdom. In 1912. I'm fast forwarding, so excuse me for fast forwarding, but if you want me to go back to it, I will. I want to get us to the Crisis magazine because this speaks more to what I've been saying about Blackdomites were intellectuals, and they have been in the Crisis magazine before the Roaring 20s, because we're going to talk about the Roaring 20s in a minute. But before the Roaring 20s, they were focused on getting their names out in the Crisis magazine. Why would they do that? Because if you understand what the Crisis magazine was for, it was for a particular conscious group of folk. The Crisis magazine is a quarterly journal of politics, culture, civil rights, and history that seeks to educate and challenge its readers about issues facing African Americans and other communities of color. And we know it's famous for W.E.B. Du Bois, right? We can go back because I just talked about the Du Boisian Veil. I'll try not, we can go on about that. Again, these are the covers of when Blackdomites were in the Crisis magazine. Now, you can see that there's right here showing Freemason regalia in the same avenue of this ad. And what does this ad say? In big, bold letters. I mean, this is now considered what? The Wild West, right? So in a Wild West poster, you got to put wanted on it, I guess. Well, they did. Wanted 500 Negro families. Farmers preferred to settle on free government lands in Chavez County, New Mexico. Blackdom is a Negro colony. Fertile soil, ideal climate, no Jim Crow laws. For information, write Harold Coleman. We spoke about Harold Coleman, the newspaper man. He becomes important during the Roaring 20s because his wife, well, she becomes his wife later, engages in the Roaring 20s and writes a book, and she does a whole lot of stuff, but her book is posthumously published and is out, and we can talk about that later too if you want. Okay, so after 1914, New Mexico is a state, and Blackdom finally gets its 40 acres. But realize there are 3 names here on Blackdom's 40-acre plot. This is the whole Boyer, under the name of Boyer. Remember, the families marry and so on, but the Boyer initial plots, these are it. And the 40 acres for is here. And these 2 names are of dead military men. Remember, military men, these are dead military men, and their wives, Patricia Russell and Maddie more got more privileges under the new assignee privileges under the the act, the Homestead Act. And so Frank Boyer became the assignee for the two widows, and that's how he eventually got, in 1914, Blackdom's 40 acres that I showed you before on the map. You can go back to it if you need to. So I'm just going year by year. 1915, okay. Pecos Valley Times. A number of Negroes from the Blackdom settlement up the valley came to Artesia, and Artesia is very important, Saturday afternoon, and put on a very credible performance in the Coring Hall that night. The receipts went to the building fund of the Blackdom Church. It is the intention of the troupe to give concerts at other places in the valley. Now, Artesia eventually becomes one of the main places for segregation once it's allowed, and once statehood happens and it's allowed to have those Jim Crow laws. Artesia becomes one of those places that doesn't allow Black people in the municipality, and it's 20 miles south of Blackdom. And we can get to the 50 years later article that may still be in here, but I will move on. So we're just going year by year here, and that's 1915, so we have 15 more years. In the Rio Grande Republic, you see references to Blackdom, and that comes out in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is Doña Ana County, where Frank Boyer and half of the Blackdomite clan goes to Vado in order to settle a new Afrotopia in Vado. But this right here is where you can see George Malone, who became attorney. He became the first Negro to do so. That's the important part. And I'll let you read it for a minute. It's there. He was the first Black lawyer to argue in front of the New Mexico Supreme Court. And he launched his career from Blackdom, and then he went off to Albuquerque, did his thing for a short period of time, and then, well, died. Let's see. Any questions before I move on into boom times?
Yeah, Dr. Nelson, there's been a couple hands raised.
Okay, go for it.
Reverend Dr. Walton, I'll allow you to talk.
Oh, no, that was okay. I was trying to actually control, it kept going up and my hand was going down. I'm finding this very interesting. And the only thing I can say is the ancestors are certainly blessing you for bringing this to us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, you have your hand raised. You may unmute yourself. Karen, Laura, you can unmute yourself to ask a question or make a comment. Okay. Once more, Karen, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask a question. Okay. Maria, you have your hand raised. You can unmute yourself. Maria? All right, we'll try Dr. Eddie Tiggs. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, and thanks for acknowledging me. I am just curious, and I lived in New Mexico for 17 years, and Ruidoso was a part of the area that I frequent. and Blackdom. I am curious to know what happened to Blackdom. Was it destroyed or
We're not
burned?
there yet. We're not there yet. I can't.
Okay,
we
you
can't
can't.
fast forward the movie. We gotta.
I get.
But I'll give you a short version. They struck oil, and so when you do that in Chavez County, which was a Confederate stronghold, and you want to maintain and have your ability to maintain your royalties throughout the World War II period, you gotta go underground a bit. So they still own the land. They lease the land to the oil. You have me fast forwarding the story, but I will do this. They leased the land to oil speculators, and there were some families that continued to farm. I know the Eubank family was one of those who continued to farm, but they probably also parceled out a bit and put it into the oil company bank, right? The land holdings. And then they went on to Roswell. So now they're occupying two spaces at the same time. Okay. And so since they're occupying two spaces at the same time, those one is producing a royalty to live somewhere else. So I'll give you an example. We talked about John Boyer. John Boyer, he started off born under the institution of slavery. And then by the time he is in his 50s, he owns a house in Roswell and a ranch in Blackdom. Do you see what I mean? Occupying two spaces at the same time. And now, once the Roaring 20s happened, that land is producing money for him to participate in the Roaring 20s. So he doesn't even have to go back to Blackdom, except when there is some kind of ceremonial production to be had, like Juneteenth. So what they would have like Thanksgiving. See, I just did the Thanksgiving thing. Ceremonies matter, right? Ceremonies matter to Freemasons and ministers and military personnel. So that's what Blackdom really became in the 1920s. But as soon as the crash hits, speculation goes down, right? What was $10 is now $1. And so now, if you have two spaces, well, you're going to have to cut one of those spaces. You're not living in Blackdom, you're living in Roswell. So you stay in Roswell, and that's how Blackdom begins to dwindle away in the Dust Bowl. Not because anything happened. Well, there were some nefarious things that happened, but it didn't necessarily affect Black people because they were ahead of the fact that the Ku Klux Klan came around in Roswell in 1924. Right. So after the striking of oil 4 years later, they inaugurate the Klan in Roswell. And New Mexico was not a safe place for the Klan, but it was in Roswell because, well, Chavez County was a part of Little Texas, which was eastern New Mexico. Long story, we fast forwarded. I'm going to have to go backwards. Are there any questions?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I love it. I can go anywhere.
If I may have a rebuttal, and that is, since they struck oil, even though they had moved from Blackdom, the Boyers had moved from Blackdom to Roswell.
Well, they moved to Vado. Well, half of them moved to Vado, half of them moved to Roswell, and then others moved to California. Because remember, you had Boyers who were in the military, and the military, whether it was the Navy, the Army, or whatnot, determined where they would be stationed. I mean, they could have even been in France, right? Blackdom went to the Philippines. So, it's like once Blackdom was established, the children had pathways to launch a career in the military or go to the California where there was no segregation and actually build a life. So
yeah, but it seems like they should. They had royalties for the as I call it, black gold.
Yes,
and so right to this day, I guess my next question is does their offspring, the Boyers' offspring,
ask them? I stay out of family business. What's a public record? You trying to get me cut up? No,
not trying to get you cut up, but I'm just trying to understand.
That is family business. But I will tell you what is on public record is the stuff that I'm telling you. If you want to know more from them, go to their family reunion.
Right,
I
right.
was actually escorted out of.
Well,
Boyer.
actually, I have a Boyer that's in
Go ahead. A Boyer who was what? You muted yourself. Boyer who was what?
my sister-in-law's family is the Boyer family, and they're in Florida, and you know, a very
Everywhere.
prominent family. So
Yeah.
they may be related to these Boyers.
I would not doubt it, because again, Florida is what? Pretty hot for the military, right? So the military, wherever the military is, you're going to have Boyers, you're going to have Blackdomites, you're going to have ministers, you're going to have military personnel and Freemasons, all in the same congregation, and they're going to colonize in some way. And that's the point of this particular narrative that we have fast forwarded. Any other questions?
Dr. Winfield, did you want to try again and see if you're unmuted now? Okay. Karen, you can unmute yourself. Karen,
Maria appears to be unmuted.
she does, but it seems like we're having issues getting her in here. And it seems like Karen maybe too. Regina Mack, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. What you may have answered this already, but from where did the Boyers migrate from before they ended up in New Mexico?
Georgia.
From Georgia.
Pelham,
Okay.
Georgia.
I'm sorry, could you say the city again?
Pelham, Georgia,
Pelham,
or Milledgeville. Either Pelham or Milledgeville. See, again, that's kind of the family narrative. I just have two of them in my head. It's either Pelham or Milledgeville, or Milledgeville used to be one or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Timothy,
Yes.
we're not going to go into any details about the Heron family, right? There's a question, will we
I
discuss the
can.
Heron?
I
Okay.
can. I mean,
Oh.
I can if that's what is the question. I was going to, let's see, hold on. Let me, I don't believe I have I don't have anything on script for the Heron family. However, I do have plenty of, okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so right here, we start looking at, okay, Esther Heron, 1917. Okay, so right before, okay, during, okay, Esther Heron. Would anyone like to speak about Esther Heron? Or, because I know the Heron family has kept together a lot of narratives about how the Heron family is kept together. I have narratives that I got from Homestead records, and I'll tell you one while a person from that family can talk. Just talk generally about like where you are right now, how
That might be, would that be Mary Hamilton maybe up on the screen?
Okay, that's fine with me.
No, I'm just asking.
Oh, I don't know.
Yes, my grandmother is Esther Heron was my grandmother's sister, and my grandmother's name was Louise Heron, and that was my grandmother. So I'm from the Heron descent.
Wow.
And my family.
So that section, let's see if I can do it with this picture. I don't know if this is a good enough picture, but maybe. So the Heron family, what number? Let's see. 19. And so that land is right here in the middle of all of the Blackdom Commons. You see? And then that green, this green area over here is where the town was. So that's, I guess on this really vague map, it would be about 2 miles from Blackdom Town Square, where the Heron family began with Esther. Again, remember I told you that right in the revival, women were at the forefront of homestead. The revival would not have happened without women. So yeah, I'm so happy you're here, and I could talk about this. Would you have any other questions or thoughts, or where are you located, or family? I'm sorry, the floor is yours.
Mary, did you have any more thoughts?
Well, I live here in California. My mother was born in Roswell, New Mexico.
Okay. See, that speaks exactly to Blackdom existing and Blackdomites existing in Roswell. Well, Roswell wasn't necessarily like segregated. It was mostly integrated, but it was a, unspoken Southern society. Okay. And if you know, like my grandparents, for example, they saw it as, don't be flashy when you go and do your thing, but when you're in town, be less flashy, so the police don't stop you. I grew up in Compton, so it was all about not being pulled over by the cops, but that's another story. But the point is, they wanted to make sure not to be flashy, and the family. So thank you. Are there any other Herons who would like, family of the Herons who would like to speak? Tell us a story, or what you remember. I see a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not part of the Heron family. My name is Antoine Clifford.
Okay,
How
go
you
ahead.
doing? I haven't talked to you in a while. Yeah, I had a question. I just got some information from one of my family members, and I guess they were saying that in regards to the daughters, I guess maybe the daughters of the original boy who came to Blackdom, I guess his daughter was married to my great grandfather's brother, Oscar. So I'm just trying to find out if you have
Oscar who?
Oscar Clifford.
Okay.
So right, so and then I know that my great auntie or great cousin, I guess is they're trying to break it down, is buried in Vada. So I have a grandmother there and an auntie that's buried in the cemetery in Vada right now.
The Riverview, Vado Riverview?
I'm not sure. I talked to one of the Boyers, and he was supposed to go take pictures for me. He said he knew her when he was growing up. So they were all together, tied in through marriage. So I'm just trying to see if you had any more information for me that I can share with our family.
Your family, the Boyer family, trust me, they have a whole stack of stuff.
Right.
But I usually deal with that in like the Facebook group for Boyer Family Dynasty, or in the Clipper group. I actually put stuff too.
Right, I see you on our page. I see you on our page.
Just hit me up in the group, and we'll talk about that off this space.
Got you. Appreciate
you. Any?
Hey, Timothy, it's Marissa.
Yes.
So you often, and I think it's important to maybe bring this up, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you often say not separate but equal, rather than, no, you say separate and equal rather than
yes,
separate but equal. Can you explain why you do that?
Yes, and I'm gonna do that by talking about D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. All right, so 1917, right? So this will actually get me back to like, how does Blackdom begin to dissipate? How does it begin to lose its vibrancy? It starts off with the war, the World War I, right? World War I takes the children, right, from the process, and now puts them in a situation where they are in the military, building a career and a life and getting money. So all of the town business moves to Roswell. Okay. And so like Ezel Ragsdale, he gets drafted. Well, what happens with Ezel Ragsdale? The town has to prepare him for what? Has to prepare him to be deployed, right? So let me show you Ezel Ragsdale. Okay. Ezel Ragsdale, Blackdom, Saturday, July 21st, 1917. He's drafted. Okay. So since the action is happening in Roswell, you end up with having to deal with everything that's in Roswell. And so now I'm going to introduce us all to Mittie Moore. Okay, real quick, because we do talk about descendants, and a lot of times most people want me to leave, well, I would say leave out Mittie Moore. Because she's not necessarily a descendant in the normal sense. She's not necessarily a Blackdomite in the normal sense, but we want to understand not just Blackdom, but its positioning in Black consciousness, right? So then you begin to understand Mittie, because she is a gunslinger in the Wild West, Black woman, bootlegger, okay, madam, right? And then she is a homesteader, okay? And I can tell you all about her history and so on, but I want you to see this, okay? Mittie Moore captured. Can you imagine a Black woman 100 years ago, and that's what's in the newspaper? Your name and captured in 1917. Now, the reason why this was a big deal is because of World War I. So you have the citizen soldier. So there was this whole push to be a cleaner society. And so they tried to clean up society. And who they want to clean up? The gunslinging madam, who's a bootlegger, right? Because it'll make the troops, the troops dizzy and unclean. And so, but yeah, Mittie Moore captured. I'm not going to go too much into it, but you can see she's captured for prostitution. Well, she has a whole group of women with her who are involved. And I like to include her because then you get to understand what I mean by Afro-Frontier, because it is a consciousness of why does this person want to homestead in a place that operates in temperance? Blackdom was a place who enforced temperance and believed in the Volstead Act, believed in prohibition. In fact, in 1927, when, and hear me out, Juneteenth did not include alcohol in Blackdom. It was preaching, songs from the choir, and it's a day of jubilee for people who actually witnessed slavery. So Mittie, and I'm going to show you where I get her stories from. Look at this. This is, if you look at normal pages, there's maybe a few sentences. Hers always have these long stories here, and it's written in cursive, and this is 1917. So I just want you to see that there are documents out there that are out there. You know, most people overlook them, but they have a lot of story in there. April 17th, right? So you have Mittie next to Ezel, right? So there's a binary in morality, right? One's a patriot, one's the anti-patriot. And so Mittie becomes the antithesis, and there becomes this whole war against her. I mean, it was pretty brutal. Now, the women of Blackdom did more, did their part, you know, on many fronts. One of their major tasks was to diversify the Black female image in Chavez County. The women of Blackdom hosted a few inter-ethnic knitting parties. Okay, they didn't hide it. Curiously, the women of Blackdom staged these intersectional gatherings in the window on Main Street in Roswell, so everyone can see. And then, you know, you can read. You can there. I believe the colonel's wife, and colonel would be from the GOS, or New Mexico Military Institute. Roswell is home of the New Mexico Military Institute. It was considered the West Point of the West, or something. There's always these sayings, but NIMI was, which was originally the Goss Institute, named after a Confederate Colonel, Robert Goss. But you can see this Henderson here. You see? Who's L.H. Henderson? But these are all these. Okay, let me back up. You have Henrietta. I can't see that name. You have Malone. You have S.M. Boyer putting on a knitting party, interethnic. So it puts a different face on Black women instead of Mitty's face during 1917, which wanted to show that Black people were patriotic. I mean, they had sons who were being drafted. Well, by November, though, Mitty Moore is on trial for attempted murder of her fiance. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to tell you the story, but guilt wasn't proven. She was like what they call the Teflon Don, but in the Wild West, right? This is 1917, by the way. So her fiance comes in, he's talking smack to her, right? And so she pulls out her revolver, okay? Pulls out her revolver and fires two pistol shots, okay? Puts 2 holes in his coat and misses him. So she was a gunslinger, pow, pow. And then, she lets him take the gun away. So yeah, that's why we have to include Mitty, because she brings a little bit more to, what was a Black woman in Chavez County 100 years ago. That's where Mitty Moore's story comes in. Not simply that she homesteaded. She also homesteaded, and they did I'll tell you about her homestead in a minute. We got to go to this homestead first. The next homestead, Ella Boyer. Often the talk is about Frankfort, okay? Ella Boyer, homesteaded, just north of, let me see if I have the picture. Oh, here we go. Okay, cool. She homesteaded north and adjacent to the town square, right? This is the town square, and I did it all pretty. I did it with the art. You know how art is. This is her land next to the 40 acres, though. So see how her land dwarfs the 40 acres she's contiguous. That ought to tell you something right there. Ella Boyer was the crown jewel in this particular narrative. She did leave. However, when she homesteaded, that is her influence. I don't know if Mitty and Ella ever spoke face to face. I doubt it, but possibly. Point is, that's a point being made right there, but that's just me telling stories. You know how historians are. So yeah.
Dr. Nelson,
yes.
Just wanted to let you know that we have it's about 5:45.
Okay.
I have a couple other questions.
Okay. And I only have one more thing I wanted to show.
Go ahead, and then we'll go to the final question.
The only thing I want to, in fact, this is where I begin to talk about the exodus from Blackdom, okay? And why is that exodus? It's because of December 31st, 1919, okay? And what happened on that day? I'll read it to you. Will pool acreage. The Blackdom people are making final arrangements to pool their land, and when it is all in, they expect to have an excess of 10,000 acres. This land is to be put in a Roswell bank and kept there until some drilling company comes along with an acceptable proposition. The reports on the street that the National Exploration Company had secured this land and were preparing to block it with their Orchard Park holdings, are without foundings. But they do end up actually blocking off in Blackdom. And just to solidify what I have been talking about, here is the ad where Blackdomites made location. Okay, that's it. Let's go to the questions.
Thank you. Let's see. Regina wrote, where did the Boyers migrate from?
Georgia.
Georgia. Let's see. There was some hands raised, but it looks like they went down. Feel free to raise your hand now to be unmuted, or write it in your question comment in the Q&A. We definitely have gotten a lot of thank yous and that this was great. Mary Hamilton, you may unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just wondering, was the Heron family descendants of the Boyers?
I think they intermarried. I don't know if they were, I don't know how that tree works. But what I understand is they may have married. I mean, they had lands that were almost butting up next to one another. So maybe the land, the proximity, but they definitely, there was some intermarrying between Blackdomites. And it usually happened as they were in church, like, you know how church go, right? Oh, this is my daughter, anyway, we won't go there. But you know how church worked. That's how this intermarrying went on.
Valerie wrote, what was the response to Blackdom by the Mescalero Apache?
I don't know. I have some ads here that speak to Mescalero Apache. Oh, no, it says it's called the Mescalero Oil Company, but I don't know if they are actual indigenous peoples behind the company. But Blackdom did, they did business with the Mescalero Oil Company, but I don't know its significance. By that time, the genocidal campaigns had resolved into a reservation situation, and if you look at the distance between Roswell, Artesia, and Ruidoso, there's a lot of space in between. So I couldn't tell you, but to be clear, some early Blackdomites were a part of the Buffalo Soldier regiments who participated in the genocidal campaigns against indigenous peoples.
Jay wrote, did Blackdom have a Black-owned bank? Were the oil royalties shared by the city or owned by individuals?
It's a good question. If you donate on my website, I could do more research and I could tell you a little bit more about that, but that requires a little bit more currency or energy to be able to tell that whole story. I can't do that here. I have my pieces. I don't have them all together. I still need to do some research on that end. I can tell you the basics of it. I mean, it was in the ad. Basically, they pool their land, and then a drilling company comes. They do their drilling, and then if there's so they lease. So then that becomes a royalty, and then they get a piece of the oil if there's materials extracted from the land, and then that becomes a part of the royalty too. That's the basic understanding of what went on back then, but I don't know exactly what went on in the company. There's the paperwork hasn't surfaced like that.
William wrote, why did they choose to go on to Vado?
It isn't a they, it's more of some went to Vado, some went to Albuquerque, some went to Raton, some went to Bernalillo. I mean, they were in diaspora, but they had a unifying space, Blackdom, that produced a royalty that funded the life wherever they were.
Jeff wrote, any information on Dora, which was said to be the other Black
Yes.
in Mexico?
So Dora is said to be the first official Black settlement. Now, Blackdom was a town incorporated. So it's a different level of consciousness. It's a different level of engagement of state power. But I will say for Dora, which is about the 1870s, it is said to have been overrun by white people. And if you look at Dora, it's an intersection. So the settlement may have been a few Black folks, but Dora was the 1870s. It really didn't, but it does speak to the migrating of Black people across into the New Mexico territory in order to escape the vibrancy of Texas's racism.
Jerome wrote, did Blackdom have a church? And if so, what denomination and who was the priest assigned?
Let's just say Blackdom was, there were a few churches, and significantly though, you will see both AME churches, both sects of AME, the AME and the AME Zionists. And I'm talking about consciously, one of which thought of back to Africa as a physical, and one thinking of back to Africa as in ritual and in memory. So, that's a longer story about churches. Actually, the selling of the church house in Blackdom really allowed for church to be held in other places and it still be Blackdom churches, right? It's like a franchising of Blackdom. They sold the original and then it franchised into Las Cruces, it franchised into Albuquerque, it franchised into Roswell. So there were many churches, but mostly AME, Baptist, missionary Baptist, that kind of denominations. But they were also denominational relative to like chaplains, right? Chaplains can't necessarily be, they can have their own personal, but when they are in the congregation of troops, they have to be less directed by a particular sect, but more in the general, non-denominational, like chaplains, right? So yeah, that's what you would see in Blackdom.
So Timothy, but there was one physical church in Blackdom or several of them?
Yes. No, there was one. Well, see, okay, so what's a church, right? They had a church and it could be outside. This is old school church. They didn't need fans. You know what I mean? So the actual church, when they finally built one, was in the revival after 1909, and then they sold it by, okay, so this is what happened with the selling of the church. Mitty finishes her whole square mile. Mitty, the gunslinger, bootlegger, and so on, she finishes a whole square mile of homestead land in February of 1922. By the summer, the Blackdom church was sold. So I believe that the selling of Blackdom church had a little to do with Mitty coming to town fully. And so that kind of began the exodus of the truly, the original Blackdomite understanding of what Afrotopia was, compared to the next wave, which came after war, right? After war, you end up with the post-war boom, where you have military men who drink, who like women of ill repute. Anyway, I keep talking about that, but yeah, that's kind of how that goes. So I'll stop there. I want more questions.
Well, I think it is about time to wrap it up, but I just wanted to thank everyone for being here this evening with us for this really important program. Definitely check out Dr. Nelson's website, Afro-Frontier.com. He also has all the social medias you should follow.
Not on TikTok though.
Oh, okay, not TikTok, but follow Blackdom clothing also. But definitely support Dr. Nelson in his research. It's very important. And oh, Karen has their hand raised. But yeah, if you have any other curiosities about Blackdom or Dr. Nelson's work, definitely check him out online. Thank you a million times, Dr. Nelson. And behind the scenes there, Marissa is Dr. Nelson's superhero who
Exactly, right?
I want to thank you guys so much, and thank you to the Friends of the Santa Fe Public Library for sponsoring this program and making it possible for us to host Dr. Nelson. Everyone, be sure to check out the library's calendar for more of our upcoming programs, and check out Dr. Nelson for what he's up to next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.